The United States has always produced giants. From the pioneers who crossed a continent to the athletes who redefine what the human body can do, American sports have a long history of turning extraordinary talent into legend. But every once in a generation, someone appears who doesn't just dominate a game. He changes the way the entire sport thinks about power, strength, and possibility. In the 1990s, inside the arenas of the National Basketball Association, something happened that even seasoned veterans couldn't quite believe. Night after night, the biggest men in the world, players over 7 feet tall, weighing more than 250 pounds, would step onto the court with confidence. They had spent their entire lives being the strongest person in the room, and then they had to guard Shaquille O'Neal. For most centers in the league, the moment of realization came slowly at first. They would watch film before the game and think they understood what they were dealing with. A massive rookie. Strong, yes. Athletic, certainly. But the NBA had seen dominant big men before. Players like Patrick Ewing and David Robinson had already established themselves as unstoppable forces in the paint, men whose combination of size, discipline, and skill had defined an entire era of basketball. Defending them required perfect positioning, timing, and toughness. But it was still basketball. There were techniques, there were counters, there were ways to compete. Then Shaq caught the ball. The first time it happened to many defenders, the experience was shocking. They would lean into him with everything they had, planting their feet and bracing their shoulders the way they had been taught since high school. Against any other center in the league, that kind of resistance was enough to slow the play down. But when Shaquille O'Neal lowered his shoulder and took a single power dribble toward the basket, something completely different happened. The defender didn't hold his ground. He didn't force a difficult shot. Instead, he moved, sometimes by several feet, as if a truck had just pushed him backward. The crowd would gasp, the rim would shake, and the ball would explode through the net before the defender even understood what had happened. The league quickly realized that this was not just another dominant player. Shaq was a physical phenomenon. Standing more than 7 feet tall and weighing well over 300 pounds, he combined the size of a heavyweight boxer with the explosive athleticism of a sprinter. During his early years with the Orlando Magic, he didn't simply score points. He overwhelmed the very structure of the game itself. His dunks were so violent that arena equipment sometimes failed under the pressure. On more than one occasion, the sheer force of his slams bent or shattered the basket supports, forcing entire arenas to pause the game while engineers rushed onto the court to repair the damage. For fans watching at home, it looked almost unreal, like the laws of physics had briefly been suspended inside a basketball arena. For the men tasked with defending him, however, there was nothing entertaining about it. Many of the NBA's most respected centers experienced the same unsettling moment during their first matchup with Shaq, the realization that traditional defense simply didn't work. Even elite defenders who had built Hall of Fame careers around protecting the rim struggled to slow him down. Among them was Dikembe Mutombo, one of the greatest shot blockers the sport had ever seen. Mutombo's defensive instincts, timing, and discipline had made him a nightmare for scorers across the league. But when he faced Shaq in the paint, the battle often looked less like strategy and more like survival. Coaches around the NBA soon began searching for solutions, but every traditional answer failed. Double teams were too slow. Fronting the post didn't work because Shaq could simply seal defenders under the basket. Even when defenders played perfectly, his sheer strength allowed him to power through contact that would stop almost any other player. Eventually, teams admitted something that sounded almost absurd. Trying to defend him normally was pointless. Instead, they turned to a desperate strategy that would become infamous across the league: intentional fouling. The tactic became known as Hack-a-Shaq. Instead of trying to stop him from scoring at the rim, defenders would wrap him up the moment he touched the ball, sending him to the free throw line over and over again. It was a strategy born out of necessity rather than confidence, an admission that if Shaq was allowed to attack the basket freely, the game could spiral out of control in minutes. Entire defensive game plans were built around this single idea: slow him down by any means possible, even if it meant committing foul after foul. Some teams went even further. Front offices quietly began signing massive players whose role had little to do with traditional basketball skills. These players were often enormous, physical enforcers whose primary job was to absorb contact and use their 6 fouls battling Shaq in the paint. They weren't expected to score. They weren't expected to dominate rebounds. Their mission was simple: make life difficult for the most powerful player the sport had ever seen, and stay on the floor long enough to delay the inevitable. But even these desperate measures rarely worked for long. By the early 2000s, when Shaq joined the Los Angeles Lakers, his dominance had reached its peak. During the 2001 NBA Finals, he delivered one of the most overwhelming performances in championship history, averaging over 30 points and dominating the glass while defenders struggled to contain him. Every possession seemed to follow the same terrifying pattern: a pass into the paint, a powerful drop step, a thunderous dunk, and an arena shaking with noise as the backboard rattled under the impact. For the centers who faced him during those years, the experience left a lasting impression. Many would later describe the same moment of clarity during their careers: the instant when they realized they were not simply competing against another great athlete, but confronting a force that fundamentally changed the balance of the game. Basketball had always celebrated skill, strategy, and finesse, but Shaquille O'Neal proved that overwhelming physical power could bend the sport in ways few had ever imagined. Today, the NBA looks very different. The modern game is built around speed, spacing, and three-point shooting, and the role of the traditional center has evolved dramatically. Yet the legend of Shaq remains a powerful reminder of a unique era in basketball history, a time when the biggest and strongest athletes on the planet stepped onto the court believing they could control the paint, only to discover that one man had already claimed it as his own.